Hey folks, you know I take my trail camera intel pretty seriously. It's a huge part of how I build my hunting strategy, and I'm always looking for gear that just flat out works. Stuff I can rely on. Backed by solid people and the best customer support in the business. That's exactly why I run Tactacam Reveal cell cameras. Whether you're just getting started or you're a full-blown data junkie like me, they've got a camera to fit your budget and your hunting style. My go-to currently is the Reveal 3.0 series with fully integrated GPS. These things are dead simple to set up. Less fiddling, more scouting and hunting. And they run on most major service providers and will automatically connect you to the strongest signal in your area. So no more hiking to the top of a ridge just to realize you've got the wrong service provider. Been there, not fun. Here's the kicker. You don't even need an SD card. That means fewer trips in, less pressure on your spots, and more real-time intel sent straight to your phone. And if you pair it with a Reveal solar panel or a lithium cartridge, you can keep those cameras running longer and spend more time doing what actually matters. Scouting new ground, dialing in a setup, or maybe, just maybe, finally cleaning the garage like you told your wife you would before the season started. Don't just take my word for it. Check out Tactacam Reveal at tactacam.com. Tactacam. Everything you need to take your hunting to the next level. Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Oscio gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Oscio's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Oscio. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. You know, when it comes to mobile hunting, weight and efficiency matter. And that's why for years I've trusted Tethered, the industry leader in saddle hunting gear. Like always, this year they've taken it up a notch with their new whitetail frame pack and the hybrid or the minimalist bino harness. And if you're looking for their most comfortable saddle they've ever built, meet the all-new Carnivore 2P. If you're like me and spend long hours in season scouting, hiking miles, and pulling those all-day sits, you got to check out Tethered's gear. I spent over 30 days this October and November chasing a particular buck. Long hikes, long sits. And Tethered system kept me dialed in. My kit, the Ultralock saddle, 1-Sticks, Predator CFX platform, and the Fast Pack. If you're serious about staying mobile and staying quiet and hunting smarter, check out everything they've got at tethered.com. Tethered, made for saddle hunters by saddle hunters. Welcome to the Truth in the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Tactacam Reveal Cellular Cameras. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 436. Today I'm joined by my buddy Brandon Barlow to talk about his 70 rule and setting up hunts based on fawning data. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hopefully you're enjoying some decent April weather, because it's been terrible here where I'm at. It's been cold. It's actually went back to feeling like February almost this past week. Lots of rain, lots of cold temperatures. Hopefully we have a shift here coming up, and will be better for those of us who are looking forward to doing some turkey hunting. I'm actually on the fence as to how much I'm actually going to get out. Got a lot of family stuff over the next couple weeks. The proms and things of that nature with for my daughter. So, and a little bit of travel with my wife, anniversary type stuff, things like that. Got to keep the fam happy. That way, when hunting season rolls around, I am good to go. This past weekend, I think I mentioned it at one point on the podcast, but I jumped into a jiu-jitsu competition, and this will make sense here in a second. Did a jiu-jitsu competition this past weekend, and actually moved up to the advanced division. I'm a blue belt still, and I jumped up to the purple belt division just because I wanted to see how I would do. Take on a little bit of an extra challenge as I'm getting ready to, start my 47th lap around the sun here in the not so distant future. I always like to kind of like once a year, when I get close to my birthday, just kind of remind myself that age is just a number. And so kind of try to go do something hard and get a little bit outside my comfort zone. Did well, placed third, won a couple, lost a couple, made a couple two main kind of tactical mistakes, and really what cost me. Didn't feel outclassed, felt good. Felt like I was right there with everyone that I competed with. So that was good. And the way this makes sense in hunting is that, a lot of what we talk about on this show, at least, I won't say it's a focus necessarily, but we do spend a fair amount of time, talking about it, because I think it's I think if you're listening to this show or you're listening to podcasts like this, a lot of it is focused on trying to get better and trying to, what's this person doing over here that maybe I can take a little piece of that, or what's this hunter over here doing that maybe I can steal a little piece of that. And, and at times you maybe mimic those people, and, and that mimicry ends up kind of like evolving into, you kind of adapting it for yourself and making it your own. I think we do that everywhere, whether you're a musician, whether you're doing jujitsu, or whether you're hunting, or whatever the case is. You start off by mimicking and maybe flattering the people that you aspire to be like, and then eventually kind of find your own way and kind of mold those things, into a style of your own. And it's no different in hunting. We're always kind of trying to get outside of our comfort zone. That's kind of the important part. If you're comfortable, you're probably not growing, right? Like if you're going to sit that same stand that you've been sitting, or that same saddle setup you've been sitting in for 5-6 years, or whatever the case is, if you're looking for better results or a different result, and you're still sitting in that same tree or in that same area or hunting that same parcel or whatever the case is, you're probably not going to reach the goals if you set loftier goals for yourself. And so with that kind of in spirit, today's episode is maybe about getting outside your comfort zone a little bit. I have my buddy Brandon Barlow on. Brandon's a good dude. He lives in the South now, but he grew up in New York hunting the Adirondack. So he has like big woods experience, and he's in the Carolinas now. And one of the interesting thing about Brandon is he runs a ton of cameras, and he is very much a advocate, I won't say advocate, but probably like a very early adopter in like the early 2000s, before it became a popular thing of long-term, or long-term data, trail camera use. And so he'll have cameras out, right now that he's set up to really start to understand an area or a place in 2027 or 2028. So he's always a couple years ahead of kind of fine-tuning a particular area. But the thing that we really kind of focus on in this episode, and what I wanted to talk to him a lot about, was one, there was a buck that he killed this year. Killer buck for anywhere, but an exceptional deer for where he hunts. And he uses a lot of fawning data and, finding where does are dropping fawns, and like basing some of his hunt planning like around that. But what we really kind of dive into is he has this approach to kind of finding where those early fawns are going to be. And it's a little different, again, because I said he's in the South, so he has a lot wider of a rut window. And so it makes a lot of his season challenging, right? Because, they could be running wild to a degree almost anywhere during a very long part of his season. A little bit different for us, like up here in the Northeast or, in the Midwest, where our rut window or our rut timing is very, is a lot shorter. I'll just put it that way. But a lot of what he shares is still true, because there's still like those does that are coming in early or late or whatever the case is, no matter where you're at all. Like the most of them are bred within a specific kind of window, but you will have some outliers. And he has what he calls his 70 rule that he uses to kind of define and identify, where there are does with fawns that are reaching a certain age that would suggest that fawn or that doe was bred at a certain time that, would allow you to maybe hunt a doe bedding area, or that a buck is bedded or moved into the area based on that doe going to be coming in earlier, or, just generally based on the timing that doe is going to come in. And so it's a really kind of interesting take. And I wanted to talk to him more about it, because the last time I had him on, he touched on it and we didn't really get to dive into it. And so I've been paying attention to like a lot of stuff he's been talking about and a lot of stuff that he's done. And wanted to have him back on to talk about that specifically, because I've had a little bit of experience, not necessarily with the fawn, his 70 rule specifically, and don't want to give it away, but he'll talk about exactly what that is and how you kind of get to that 70 rule. But I had a little bit of experience with this 2 seasons ago in a specific location, and it's held true for me, and I've found success in that spot. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hopefully you're enjoying some decent April weather, because it's been terrible here where I'm at. It's been cold. It's actually went back to feeling like February almost this past week. Lots of rain, lots of cold temperatures. Hopefully we have a shift here coming up, and will be better for those of us who are looking forward to doing some turkey hunting. I'm actually on the fence as to how much I'm actually going to get out. Got a lot of family stuff over the next couple weeks. The proms and things of that nature with for my daughter. So, and then a little bit of travel with my wife, anniversary type stuff, things like that got to keep the fam happy. That way, when hunting season rolls around, I am good to go. This past weekend, I think I mentioned it at one point on the podcast, but I jumped into a jiu-jitsu competition, and this will make sense here in a second. Did a jiu-jitsu competition this past weekend, and actually moved up to the advanced division. I'm a blue belt still, and I jumped up to the purple belt division just because I wanted to see how I would do. Take on a little bit of an extra challenge as I'm getting ready to, start my 47th lap around the sun here in the not so distant future. I always like to kind of like once a year when I get close to my birthday, just kind of remind myself that age is just a number. And so kind of try to go do something hard and get a little bit outside my comfort zone. Did well, placed third, won a couple, lost a couple, made a couple two main kind of tactical mistakes, and really what cost me. Didn't feel outclassed, felt good. Felt like I was right there with everyone that I competed with. So that was good. And the way this makes sense in hunting is that, a lot of what we talk about, on this show, at least, I won't say it's a focus necessarily, but we do spend a fair amount of time, talking about it. Cause I think it's, I think if you're listening to this show or you're listening to podcasts like this, a lot of it is focused on trying to get better and trying to, what's this person doing over here that maybe I can take a little piece of that, or what's this hunter over here doing that maybe I can steal a little piece of that. And, and at times you maybe mimic those people, and, and that mimicry ends up kind of like evolving into, you kind of adapting it for yourself and making it your own. I think we do that everywhere, whether you're a musician, whether you're doing jiu-jitsu, or whether you're hunting, or whatever the case is. You start off by mimicking and maybe flattering the people that you aspire to be like, and then eventually kind of find your own way and kind of mold those things, into a style of your own. And it's no different in hunting. We're always kind of trying to get outside of our comfort zone. That's kind of the important part. If you're comfortable, you're probably not growing, right? Like if you're going to sit that same stand that you've been sitting, or that same saddle setup you've been sitting in for 5-6 years, or whatever the case is, if you're looking for better results or a different result, and you're still sitting in that same tree or in that same area or hunting that same parcel or whatever the case is, you're probably not going to reach the goals if you set loftier goals for yourself. And so with that kind of in spirit, today's episode is maybe about getting outside your comfort zone a little bit. I have my buddy Brandon Barlow on. Brandon's a good dude. He lives in the South now, but he grew up in New York hunting the Adirondack. So he has like big woods experience, and he's in the Carolinas now. And one of the interesting thing about Brandon is he runs a ton of cameras, and he is very much a advocate. I won't say advocate, but probably like a very early adopter in like the early 2000s, before it became a popular thing of long-term, or long-term data, trail camera use. And so he'll have cameras out, right now that he's set up to really start to understand an area or a place in 2027 or 2028. So he's always a couple years ahead of kind of fine-tuning a particular area. But the thing that we really kind of focus on in this episode, and what I wanted to talk to him a lot about, was one, there was a buck that he killed this year. Killer buck for anywhere, but an exceptional deer for where he hunts. And he uses a lot of fawning data and, finding where does are dropping fawns, and like basing some of his hunt planning like around that. But what we really kind of dive into is he has this approach to kind of finding where those early fawns are going to be. And it's a little different, again, because I said he's in the South, so he has a lot wider of a rut window. And so it makes a lot of his season challenging, right? Because, they could be running wild to a degree almost anywhere during a very long part of his season. A little bit different for us, like up here in the Northeast or, in the Midwest, where our rut window or our rut timing is is a lot shorter. I'll just put it that way. But a lot of what he shares is still true, because there's still like those does that are coming in early or late or whatever the case is, no matter where you're at all. Like the most of them are bred within a specific kind of window, but you will have some outliers. And he has what he calls his 70 rule that he uses to kind of define and identify, where there are does with fawns that are reaching a certain age that would suggest that fawn or that doe was bred at a certain time that, would allow you to maybe hunt a doe bedding area, or that a buck is bedded or moved into the area based on that doe going to be coming in earlier, or, just generally based on the timing that doe is going to come in. And so it's a really kind of interesting take. And I wanted to talk to him more about it, because the last time I had him on, he touched on it and we didn't really get to dive into it. And so I've been paying attention to like a lot of stuff he's been talking about and a lot of stuff that he's done. And wanted to have him back on to talk about that specifically, because I've had a little bit of experience, not necessarily with the fawn, his 70 rule specifically, and don't want to give it away, but he'll talk about exactly what that is and how you kind of get to that 70 rule. But I had a little bit of experience with this 2 seasons ago in a specific location, and it's held true for me, and I've found success in that spot. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. Today, I got on my buddy. He's a second-time offender. You know, there's no prison time associated with that, but I got my buddy, Mr. Brandon Barlow, on. What's going on, dude?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
You bet, man. We were talking before we jumped on. Like you got the official microphone and everything now, dude. Legit.
The audio will be digestible this time, hopefully.
Dude, I can work some magic usually. Like there's been some times where like I've recorded podcasts, and look, everyone has different setups and stuff like that, and that's like the game you play. Like when you host a podcast, not everybody does podcasts, right? So, but I've gotten pretty handy at using AI to fix a lot of stuff. That's like my that, and I was an audio engineer in a studio for a bunch of years, so I can usually fix most things.
But not if a zipper's rubbing up and down on the microphone. That's it's a little too much.
As long as it happens whenever they're not talking, like I'm good. I can pull that stuff out. You know what I mean?
Hopefully we're good. Yeah, hopefully we're good.
Nice, man. But how you been, buddy? How are things in the South?
Everything's been good. Doing better than I deserve. I hope you guys are. I've been following you along. Looks like the BJJ has been keeping you pretty busy.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not really the health kind of guy, but I'm trying to get there. I've lost about 40 pounds, so
Nice.
I'm feeling vital, but not like you guys that are working out every day. But doing good. Girls are good. Job is good. Everything's good. Only thing that sucks is I only have out maybe a third of my spring cameras, so that's kind of slack on me.
Yeah,
but,
I feel you there, man. I'm kind of in a similar boat. Like to your point, BJJ has definitely kept me busy. I always it's always helpful for me once the season is over, and especially kind of after this year chasing that deer. Like I just needed a good decompression, like get away from hunting for a little bit, and started shooting a longbow more, like doing all that kind of stuff. Still hunting related stuff, but kind of like gave myself a little mental break, and like the jiu-jitsu stuff's always kind of like a good kind of a good healthy way to kind of get that distance. And it's always nice because I have a competition that I'm doing, and that I usually do it around the same time every year. And that for me kind of marks like, all right, we've had enough time to kind of decompress from hunting, and now we're ready to kind of jump back into it full tilt. And that's next weekend. And so then, I've been getting out and like in small increments of time, just 3 hours here, 4 hours there, get a camera out, pull this camera, whatever I can do between, to your point, family, kids, all that kind of stuff, but
you got to have a regiment, man. For me, I run so many cameras that I'm running over 100 now. I have for 13 seasons, and I have to have a weekly regiment, like where I go and I just do X amount, or else I will never, if it snowballs on me to such a point, I will never, I just hung some 2027 cameras, and I know that's what you want to talk about.
Right.
So I have a regimen, and I have to run a certain thing at a certain time, or I won't get it done. So it's a weekly game for me, and that inhibits me from doing other things. But I like to chase some monster catfish, so you can't.
I see you out in the water chasing some catfish, dude. I see you out in the water doing your thing.
Yeah. Monster hunting out there. You can't just do deer. For me, because of the weekly regimen, I have to keep sanity too. I have to go out and fish and spend time, going to the movies with the girls and things like that.
Right. Yeah. I did the daddy-daughter date stuff this weekend. We went and got some Chinese food, hung out. I think we went and got ramen, I think is what we did, and hung out, just chit-chatted, spend some family time. She's actually getting ready to go get her prom dress
Oh
tailored.
Lord.
Is it called tailored? I don't even know what it's called. Fitted,
Oh
or
yeah.
I don't know what it
You're
is.
asking the
Yeah,
wrong dude.
yeah. I figured you were up on this stuff, man.
I was born in the mountains and I went to public school, so that's not me. It's definitely not
That's
me.
awesome,
I
dude. I
could
love
put you
hearing
on
that you're
some.
getting the 27 cameras out, man. Like that's
I got
some
some
dedicate.
28s. I got some 28s too on a new
How
spot.
why
The
do you designate
27
it?
cameras are actually last year's cameras.
Okay, what designates them as 27 or 28? Is it just areas that you're
It's
continuing
an
to like
area that
learning
I
about?
know. It's an area that's new and I know nothing about yet, and so my expectation is worst case scenario, which is I'm going to grow a spike horn into a Pope and young deer, and
Right.
that's what's going to take. Now I can go in there and find a big buck, but I can't expect that, and even if I do, I won't have any information on him, and I won't be able to set up a high odd sit, and so it's not worth my time. They're good, you know.
Right.
It's just so it's a longer term game for me.
hmm When you
I'm
when you get to a new piece, because I kind of went through this, with that deer that I chased this year to a degree, how long do you usually give, or how many years of intel do you usually want before you feel pretty good about being able to have some high odds sits, where you feel like you're in the game?
so So, a perfect world means like no desperate measures, right? Because
hmm
where I live in North Carolina, it's a constant thing of desperate measures. I mean, I lost six cameras and two day walking mature bucks from the forest fires.
hmm
The hurricanes are always displacing bucks. I mean, and I know you want to probably get into how I hunt with respect to like beds, but if you've got a REM cycle bed where a buck is burnt it to the dirt, living in it part time a couple days a week, and that now is under 12 inches of water, your game has changed. And so
hmm
I'm dealing with a lot of that type of stuff. And we have deer dogs, and which is super pressure. I know the guys from Michigan don't like that word, but dogs are. It is what
hmm
it is. And so, 40 black and tans on a couple thousand acres I mean, that's super pressure. And so,
Yeah.
with all of that aside, let's say I'm in an area where it's not pressured. Generally, I'm trying to do a 2 to 3 year strike. I'm never
Mm-hmm.
hunting bucks on the first year that I find them, and I'm pretty much only hunting specific bucks. That doesn't mean I don't kill other bucks. Like last year, I killed a big 10 pointer who was with the Magnolia Buck I killed this year, the 167. They were
hmm
together last year. And the 10 pointer stepped in the scrape first, and that's just how it goes. I mean, you don't pass a 150-inch 10 point. I don't,
Right.
so
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So shot his buddy the 10 last year. The Magnolia Buck got a pass. And so I had that place pretty dialed in with respect to timing, and I know you want to get into that and
hmm
um, what got me there. But generally, it's a 2 to 3 year game for me because it takes time for me to go
hmm
into a piece and collect the kind of data that I need to do a high odds sit. I need to narrow down the estrus timing on that property, which always lines up with the big buck pictures. I mean, I know you want to kind of get into that today,
hmm
but it takes time for me to gather all of the historical information, the historical breeding, when are acorns falling, when was that big buck there, does he live there all the time? Keep in mind, though, I'm only focusing on daytime deer. That's all I care about. I have two folders right here on my computer, and it's day and night pics. And the night pics are fun to look at, but that's not at all what I care about. I only care
hmm
about daytime deer, really in primary bedding areas. And I know that's a definition of its own, but that to me means a place where you have daytime deer 7 days a week. And so that's where I'm
hmm
focusing.
Right. So there's nighttime. Is there any what? Let me ask it this way: what intel, if any, are you gleaning from those nighttime photos?
You can get some. For example, sometimes the only fawn picture you might get, and that's kind of where we're going with this,
hmm
could be at night. Um, but for the most part, with nighttime pictures, the deduction that I'm getting right away is that I'm in the wrong area.
hmm
Um, Period. I'm in the wrong area. I mean, I'm not trying to find travel corridors, and I'm not trying to hunt food sources, and I'm not trying to hunt. In like temporary or secondary bedding areas. They're just not reliable enough. And so I'm if I'm getting nighttime pictures, my first deduction is to kill that camera and move it because I'm in the wrong spot.
hmm
All of my mock scrapes get 90% daytime pictures, or I kill the camera and I move it, I'm in the wrong spot. I can't be super efficient in those spots, and so I just don't focus on them.
Hmm.
That's the biggest takeaway is I need to get
Right.
out of here. I'm in
Right.
a
Because
travel
that's
corridor or something. I got to go. I got to get out of here.
right. That's
That doesn't
interesting.
mean
Because
rut hunting. That travel corridor could be big money in PA Mountains or in Ohio or something if you're a rut hunter, but that's not what we're talking about here. And we should probably preface with that. We're talking about like early season, September, October, really all time of year, but the rut bonanza that happens really shakes things up. And I personally hate hunting during the rut. We don't really have a place here to hunt with rut. We don't have terrain. I don't get the back and forth. We have a wide rut window where it starts in frickin' September, and I get fawns born in August, so the rut runs through February, and so
right.
it's not the same here. And so it's
Yeah.
really about hunting the right place at the right time in the South. And I know the further north you get into PA and stuff, you can find what you're going to talk about in a minute with the early doe. But for the most part, if I'm finding nighttime deer, I'm just in the wrong area. I don't want to be there.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting, man. Because I know for me, especially like if I'm in the mountain setup, I don't get too dissuaded by nighttime deer pictures, especially in like an area that's that big. Like I know that I'm not on top of his bed, but as long as it's not, when I say nighttime, as long as it's not
define
like
nighttime, right?
right, that's what I was gonna say. Right, it's like if it's like 10 o'clock or something like that, it's like I need to think about where I need to kind of move this
my
camera.
cutoff is 5 to 9, so 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. And I say that
Yeah.
because here with super pressure, I have cameras on buck beds, and I know for a fact that some of my deer, even at 2 and 3, will not leave their bedding, like their little bedding, 1 to 2 8, whatever, their little zone where they're living. They will not leave that until sometimes 8:30 at night, and so
Right.
especially if they've got buckshot in them, right? Like so.
Right.
They're not, and so usually 5 a.m. to 9 is what I call a daytime deer,
Mhm.
and then of course if it's 4:30 in the morning, maybe he's just coming, or if it's
Right.
9:15 at night, maybe he's just going, and that's intel. But like if it's like a 170 at midnight, night folder. I don't give a
Yeah.
crap about that deer. I almost
Yeah.
cussed,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care
No.
about that. I don't care about that deer. He's beautiful, but it's like a summer buck that's like just out in the field. I just don't care about it. It's
Yeah.
just
No. That's. I
you're
mean, I
not
think
getting
it's
big
helpful.
velvet pictures from me. I don't. It's stupid.
Right. I think that's helpful for people that are listening because even though we hunt in very different type of terrain, and you grew up hunting very similar stuff that I currently hunt,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm very similar in the way that I have a cutoff point to where it's like whether that intel is meaningful for me or not, and if it's past a certain point, then it's like, well, then I need to think about, hopefully had it on video mode and I
You
can see
still know a big
directionally.
buck is living there, right? I mean,
Right, and that's
they're not nomadic. I mean, they have
right,
a home range. Anything with a home range can be killed in a bed.
right,
Period.
and,
And
and
it
so that
has a
tells me it's
home
like he's
range.
somewhere here, he's somewhere
Yes.
around here. I don't
Yes.
know, I'm not close
Yes.
enough yet, right? So now we start to ask the question why, right?
That
You let
doesn't mean
the
that's not his daytime spot in June
right,
or in January. It's just not maybe in October.
right, yeah,
And that could be due to various things, but
yeah, nice. So let's transition here, man, because like you mentioned the Magnolia Buck, right?
yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about this because I know the last time you were on, you killed that Big Ten, right? And you told me a little bit about the Magnolia Buck. And this
Yeah.
was the
Son of
fourth
a
year.
bitch.
This is the fourth year you were hunting him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you obviously knew you had a good beat on him because you saw him the year before, right? It was
Yep.
just his buddy
Yep.
stepped out
I
first,
passed
right?
him 2 years ago.
So that's crazy, man. But
But
so
he was 130-inch 8-point, maybe 125-inch. You've seen his frame. I mean, he's not
yeah,
like he's a 167, but he's maybe 16 inside. He grew a bunch of junk because it
yeah,
took me so long, a couple of years, 3 years to kill him. But when I passed him, he was probably 125-inch 8-point, and I was hunting an absolute monster. And it really hurt my feelings to pass him. But I said, okay, I got you dialed in because I found him as a 2-year-old,
hmm
and he was in the same area at the same exact time as a 3-year-old, and I passed him because I was hunting that big buck. And then the very next year, he was what I believe to be 4 or 5 when I killed the 10-pointer. And then this year,
hmm
he was 6 or 7, and I shot him on October 12th, which was actually about that was at the cutoff. I mean, that deer showed up for 3 years in a row around the 20th of September as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old. He showed up around that time. And then on the island where he was in that area, by October 10th, really, um, the foliage changes
Hmm.
and you can really see right across the island, and the deer are just not living in there like they were. And so I killed them on the 12th, and in the pictures you can see like you can start to see like, you know, I started seeing like a 50 yard crack out of my tree, and that's about the cutoff where he just would move. And then I
Right.
didn't know. And that buck, I knew of or seen of on trail camera or witnessed him use around 40 beds in 4 years. I believe about 5 or 6 of them were probably primary beds. I think he
And you
had
call those primary beds, you refer to those as REM cycle beds?
no, usually they're
Oh,
in proximity to his main bed.
okay.
So what I call a primary bed is going to be within 20 to 30 yards of his actual real bed. Like, so like, let's say a thunderstorm rolls through and real shit hits the fan. He
Hmm.
will be in that bed that he has burnt to the dirt. The one picture of the Magnolia Buck where he's standing, his front feet are in his bed. He was living in that hole. And that's where you'd catch him a couple days a week throughout the day. He'd use that bed periodically. But if there was really, really bad weather, he would be in that bed. But what I consider primary bedding is he had maybe 8 or 9 other little beds, 6 beds around there. And so whenever I'd go in there off season, I never knew where the hell I'd bust him out of, because he could be like in that hump, that hump. But he was in this like little 2 to 3 acre, what I consider like a bubble, like his little daytime bubble. And he would have a bunch of little primary beds in there. You don't quite know where you're going to bust him out of, but he's living in there. And then he had the one, what I call REM cycle bed in that hole burnt to the dirt, where he laid his chin on the ground for 30 minutes a day and caught a REM cycle and just turned the lights out.
Right.
They have to do
Nice.
that every day. And that's not something a lot of people talk about. I don't know if anybody's ever used REM cycle in a deer in a sentence before.
You're the first person I've ever heard say it, which is why I brought it up real
But it
quick. I
makes you
wanted to,
think about bedding differently
it does. It 100%
because
does.
they have to turn the lights off.
Did you see the same thing? Cuz I know you're from just, for people who maybe didn't catch the first time you were on, like you grew up in upstate New York hunting the Adirondacks and stuff
Yep.
like that. So, did you see anything similar to that, or maybe even just the same exact thing in that kind of setup, like in the mountain, vast
Yeah.
areas, right? Same thing?
Well, so not as extreme, because in the Adirondacks with this extreme winter, you have a lot tighter rut window and a lot tighter breeding window. Most of your fawns are born, say, June to July. Most of your rut happens, say, 10/20 to 12/1. That's
Mm-hmm.
your rut. That's when your fawns are born. It lines up, and that's due to harsh winter, right? If they're born too
Mm-hmm.
early, if they're born too late, they'll die, etc. Everybody knows this. Um, but that's why it's a little tighter up there. However, it's still all does are not impregnated at the same time. All bucks can't be everywhere at once. Different does come hot at different times. That's why you do see spring fawns, summer fawns, June fawns, 4th of July fawns, and you maybe see a little nugget fawn middle of June. It's got wobbly
Mm-hmm.
legs, and then a month later you see another little wobbly leg nugget fawn. Those does were impregnated at different times, and even though
Right.
it's a smaller window than here in the South, you can still find outliers. And so I started out hunting agriculture with my family in the Adirondacks, and then when I was in my 20s, I started tracking deer. And through tracking deer is how I realized that I would see fawns earlier, fawn tracks and fawns earlier in some spots, later in others. I started to realize that it lined up with big buck sightings. And then later, when trail cameras came available in the 2000s, was when I was really able to confirm 100% that those big buck pictures line up with with those hot does. They are there to procreate, and they know that they need
Mm-hmm.
to be there, and that's why they're there. And so they're where they need to be. And I've
Mm-hmm.
proven that through countless 10,000 videos. It always is where those bucks are. And so, to answer your question, in the Adirondacks tracking, you would see, so maybe a swamp was a 1031 swamp, and another field was an 1120 field. And so you can time your big bucks that way, but it's more difficult because now you're in the heat of the rut and they act crazy.
Right.
So it's a losing game, and you can't really use this in those areas. The only way that this is going to help you in that type of environment is if you find an early doe. You're in a situation where you find an October 10th doe, 10/20 doe. That's a lot earlier than the other deer, and you can guarantee a big buck is going to be staging on her, or a couple of them. And even in what I find in the northern areas is you have bifurcated estrus states in urban areas. And so don't discount because you're down in like Philly that you're not going to have a whole bunch of different estrus states in and around that
Hmm.
urban area, because those deer have resources available to them. It's all resource based. And so if you're in, Chicago downtown, and those deer can chaw and stuff year round, their estrus state is you're going to naturally get like this bifurcation that happens, and you're going to have a little wider. I mean, that's the evolution that happens. And so the climate in the South has caused it to be a really wide estrus window. And so because of that, if you're able to time when those deer are coming hot, you can time when you're going to see your big bucks. And one of my
Right.
favorite things to do is when guys send me pictures like in August of some fawns, and I'm like, that's an 11/20 spot, and they're like, dude, that's when I saw the monster. And I'm like, I know, dude, it always lines up.
So,
I
so
have
what
a
I'm going to
thousand
start doing,
testimonials. It's like, dude, it lines up. Like, it does line up. And we can get into the 70 rule and the way that I actually
yeah,
deduce that. But
yeah,
there's
I
a
want to get it.
method, and it's not complicated because I'm
Yeah, I
stupid.
want, I want to get
So,
into that in a second, but I think what I just learned is I'm going to start sending you all my fawn pictures, and that way you can tell me back date for me.
Mhm.
No, but I want to get back to
It always works.
I want to get back to the rem bed for one quick second before we jump
Yeah.
to more of the fawn stuff.
Mhm.
So, did you see rem beds as frequently in the mountains as you did in the South where you are now, and were they as consistent?
No, because I didn't know what I know now, and I didn't key
Mm,
into deer the way that I do now, and so I'm a lot better at
fair.
finding these beds now. For example, I can generally find a rem bed based off like the height of that buck's browse damage, and if I can find where he's staggering around in a daylight spot, it has to be. This is all daylight. If I'm talking, it's daylight. We're talking about daylight. I don't care
Hmm.
about anything night related. So if you can find a
Hmm.
day walker, what I call a day walking buck, if you can find a day walker anywhere, and you can go in there and you can start to find his browse damage, they walk. What I found tracking is these deer will move in straight lines. When I used to track on deer in the snow, we don't get snow here, which sucks. But when I used to track deer in the snow, I'd get on a buck and I might go 1,000 yards in a straight line, and then he'd like start to kind of meander around. You'd see where he's browsing, and then you jump his ass. And it'd be
Hmm.
like, oh shit, that was him, And like I learned that the hard way. So now one of the things I'm really good at finding beds now, just because I look for browse damage, and if it's at a certain height, I mean does can't nip that high. So if you're
Hmm.
finding your deers, the other thing here too is like we don't have a lot of big bucks, and so I went out and spotlighted my whole county this year twice until like 2 in the morning, and couldn't find a 130-inch buck in my whole county either time in a bean field. So like in the South where we don't have really old deer, and we have a really kind of jacked up rut. I mean, you got to know when to hunt certain thickets, man. I mean, otherwise you're just going to be hunting over pregnant does,
Right. Yeah.
and you're
So,
not going to see
I mean,
anything.
that's helpful. I like the idea of paying attention to the height of the browse line and things like that. I'm going to start paying more attention.
Hmm.
You have me thinking of one particular spot that I can think of that I would probably refer to a rem bed, and it's been kind of stuck in my mind for probably the past, well, since hunting season ended, basically. It's the one place in the mountain that I found where there was a bed that was worn like completely down to the
I
dirt.
do. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I did find them in the mountains. But it was far more rare for me because I wasn't as good at what I do.
No, no, no. I
That was
totally,
20 years
yeah,
ago, and it took me a really
yeah.
long time to dial this in.
Come on, dude. I really wanted you
You know,
no, I'm just
I
kidding.
mean, when I found one that in those days, I killed over that thing. I mean, I knew
Right.
that was if you can find a bed like that, like what I call now a REM cycle bed, if you can find one of those beds, I mean,
Yeah.
you sit there 5 days, unless you reek or you're wind, I mean, that just gets into basic hunting and woodsmanship.
Right.
If a real hunter sits there for 5 days, he's dead.
Right. Because the
You
one that
know?
I found, and it was probably, I think it was the first year I was scouting this area. Um, I found a rub line and I started following it, and it led me right to a bed that was completely worn to the ground. It was a classic setup to where it's like wind over his back. He could see everything in front of him. He'd make it really hard to hunt him. It's like
Yeah.
you would have to figure out how he's exiting, and because it's so open in front of him, like there wasn't a defined trail as to how he was getting out of there necessarily. So
There never
figuring out how
is.
he was at, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
there's never a trail. The Magnolia Buck, I had that guy's bed for 2.5 years, and that son of a bitch never came or left the same way twice.
that's awesome.
They don't make an imprint like that, man. You'll see
Yeah.
the browse damage because they will stand up and browse during the day, and when they come and go, they'll browse. So if you're looking on the dirt, you're not going to see where he came and went from. You've got to look nipple high if you want to see that trail.
Right. Nipple
And
high to the sky.
that'll tell you. My nipple high will tell you where he's coming and going. We see nip, 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 right about that height.
Right.
That's where he. But when you're in his what I consider to be his daytime spot, his 1 to 5 acre spot, everything's going to be nipped because they get up all
Right.
day, and that's where I get all the daytime pictures. Is he's moving around that little area during the day, and
Hmm.
guys, I think they have the misinterpretation that deer are sleeping all day, and that's not the truth. I mean, they're on their
Right.
feet all
Right.
day.
Right. I think you need
Yeah.
shirts. I think you need shirts now that say nipple high.
Nipple
Yeah, I
high,
think
man. That's my new saying. That's
nice,
how
man.
high it is for me. I mean, I'm six
Right.
foot three, and when I see nips off belly
Right.
button to nipple, I mean, that's not a doe. My
Right.
does are 100 pounds.
Yeah. Nice, man. So, all right. So that's, I know we've beat around the bush a little bit about this 70 rule, and like,
Yeah.
and that's, a lot of what I want to talk to you about today, because I
Mhm.
think we're at the right time of the year here where, a lot of guys are going to be out turkey hunting, here in the north, right? And it's a lot of it's already kicked off in the south, and also spending that much time out, turkey hunting, whatever.
Mhm.
Like me, I'm kind of double dipping where it's I'm hunting part of the day and maybe scouting part of the day, type
Yeah.
of thing. Don't get too jazzed up about turkeys. I use it as an excuse to get out. But it's a great time to start thinking about, you know, trail camera placements, doing a little extra scouting,
Yep.
and fawn drop is not too far away. And, knowing that
Yeah.
you base a lot of what you do off of fawn data and doe data, I
Mhm.
wanted to chat with you about it because was out hanging a couple cameras, and I was thinking back to an area in a conversation that you and I had where I killed one of the deer that I killed, and I killed it on an early fawn date. I saw a fawn drop early, and it's a 1020, it's a 1020 spot.
So it's like a 6'10" fawn, right? 6'15"
Yeah,
fawnish. You probably
yeah,
seen them around 6'20" as a little nugget because they hide for
yep,
a while.
yep, exactly. And that
Yep.
was my hunch from that spot, just the intel that I got. Because, like, to your point, I would see a big buck 2 years in a row show
Mhm.
up on camera in daylight around the same, like, 3 or 4 day window for 2 years in a row. And I was like, man, there's got to be an early doe in here. There's got to be an early fawn drop. And sure enough,
Dude, that's why they're hitting scrapes. Everybody talks about scrape week in October. I mean, they're not checking the refrigerator. I mean, they're trying to figure out who's coming hot when, and that's where they're going to be.
right,
For
right,
here, we get
exactly.
scrape activity, 9:10, 9:15. They're railing scrapes, and they're ready.
Right.
But up there,
Okay.
yeah, 10:1, 10:15, you start getting a little scrape action. I mean, they're not there like, you know, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
They're there looking to see who's got those
They're looking to
tones.
score. Who's got the
Yeah,
goods?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I want, before we jump into like fawning trail cameras, because you hang cameras specifically to gather fawning data, particularly. But I want to talk about the 70 rule that you have,
Sure.
because you mentioned it in the last podcast we did together, but we didn't really get into it. And I actually watched some of the YouTube video that you had put out talking about the 70 rule because I wanted to understand it better.
Sure.
Right? Because I was just, everything that I've seen from you just makes so much sense, and it's so well thought out, and it's so well kind of
Thank you.
validated, right? Where it's like you gather the data, you look at it, right? It's not something you've looked at for like a year and made up your mind. It's something things that you've looked at for years and years, right?
Yep.
And so I wanted to understand this a little bit better. So let's start with here, just what is the 70 rule? Like, and where did it kind of come from for
Yep.
you?
Yeah, the 70 rule is a rule that I came up with back in the early 2000s. It's a way that I take the deer sign I'm seeing in the woods and I put a date to it. It's not that complicated. And basically, there's three components to my 70 rule. The first one is deer tracks. And we can get into a little bit of that. But essentially, I'm carrying a tape measure everywhere I go in the woods, and I'm always measuring deer tracks. And one thing that you can do that everybody can do really easily is they can measure fawn tracks. And so we're talking about finding those early does so that we can find that early October slob that hasn't been hunted yet and he's still being lazy and we want to kill him. And so how do you find that early doe? And so you're out in the woods and when fawns are really, really young, especially like let's say you're out there right now during turkey season, which is what you said. Maybe it's May, maybe you're hoping to catch a fawn in May, and so you're going to go out and look for tracks. But let's say it's August or September. I mean, if you see a fawn track in May, you know you're in the money, right? It's a
Hmm.
pre-June, pre-July. I mean, really, you're looking at like a July fawn being a November typical rut.
Hmm.
Doe, that's a typical rut spot. So you're really looking for a June, 520 to a 615 fawn. If you're out there at that time and you see a track, you know you're in the money, lowest hanging fruit. But let's say it's August or September and you're out there. The way that you tell is by measuring tracks. And so I like to measure tracks everywhere I go. And so I always have a baseline for how big my deer tracks are, my doe tracks on a certain property. So let's say you're just out there for the first time and you find a doe track and there's a fawn track like walking in it or next to it. It's a doe and a fawn. You know it.
Hmm.
The doe has a 2 inch wide track. So the 70 rule is if around that 9-1 time frame, if you can find a fawn that has a footprint that's 70% the size of her mother's, that fawn is older, right? Older
Hmm.
fawn, bigger foot. So that 515 to 6-1 fawn, or even an April fawn, is going to have a track around 9-1, 915. That's 70% the size of its mother's. If she's got a 2 inch track, that fawn track will be an inch and a half wide. That's an old fawn. If you put your eyes on that fawn, you will see what I'm talking about. But that's an older fawn. You will see other fawn tracks around that time of year that maybe are half the size, 50%. Those typical rut spots, that November rut hunting. Those fawns, like around September 1st, they're going to be like 50%. So if she's got a 2 inch wide track, that fawn's probably got a 1 inch wide track. That's a
Hmm.
rut spot. You're looking around that 9-1 time frame. The 70 rule is the first aspect is measuring tracks. You need to find a fawn track around 9-1 that's 70% the size of its mother's. If you can do that, you are in an early spot. That doe was
Hmm.
impregnated early. That fawn is huge. You never want to base your hunting season off the data from one doe, one deer, but you're in that area. Chances are the whole doe group has a similar estrus timing, and so you can kind of work your way around, do some scouting, and you'll see another doe with a pair of fawns that are the same size, and you'll say,
Hmm.
okay, this little area, these fawns were born around this time. And so around 9-1, if you can find a track that's 70% the size of its mother's, that is an early doe, period.
Hmm.
You need to hunt there early. And maybe late. We could talk about that too, because that
Right.
fawn will come hot herself later, which is the third part of the 70 rule. But the second part of the 70 rule is visual, which is what I was just alluding to. So you find the track at 70% the size of mom's. You go out there, you get the kids, you get an ice cream, and you park the truck on the side of the highway. What are you expecting to see? You're expecting to see some deer come out, some does and some fawns. But the deer that left those tracks, that fawn around that time frame, 70% of his or her spots will be gone. That
Hmm.
fawn will be partially speckled. It will be noticeably bigger than the other deer. Um, it can jump a fence, maybe the other ones can't. It'll be
Hmm.
very obvious that older fawn that has that 70% track will have lost 70% of its spots by now. And so
Hmm.
if you're just going out to Kansas and it's 10-1 and you're glassing fields and you're looking for bucks like everybody else, that's great. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to look for a giant fawn that has like one spot left. And that's where I'm going to bow hunt because I know for a fact that that doe's hot at that time. And I've hung cameras and proved it time and time again. And so the second part of my 70 rule is visual. Visually look at your fawns and see, I mean, around that fall time frame. Visually in the spring, May, you have a track, boom. Visually on a trail camera, which we'll get into with where to hang them, or visually in the fall. You see that one fawn or that one corner of the field where there's a few fawns and they're losing their spots. That's where you need to hunt that time of year early. Um, and the third part of the 70 rule is is weight. So that
Hmm.
deer will weigh about 70 pounds now. If it's
Mhm.
lost its spots, most of them, it's got the big track, it's about a 70-pound fawn at that time of year. That fawn will estrus too. So what I've found is late season, especially here, like January, those big bucks, and this year I posted like big buck after big buck. It was a nonstop buck train right after hunting season closed on some hot fawns. And I mean, it was one after another, and there was some just shooter after shooter coming through. And so that's why they're there. I didn't have food, I didn't have anything else. I had a bunch of hot fawns that were probably more like 80 pounds when it came to October.
Hmm.
And they were estrusing themselves. And so those little fawns would come in and they'd hit the scrape and they'd do some body language, which we can get into, but they'd rub
Mhm.
urinate in it and act weird.
Hmm.
And then that night, boom, monster, monster. And that's why they come. And so,
Hmm.
that's the three parts of my 70 rule, basically measuring tracks
Right.
visually and body size. And that can put you pretty close. And if I could just go for one more second. So how
Yeah.
I like to look at that is, so let's say your dad says you need to hunt the swamp always around Halloween. That's when he always sees big bucks. You remember he killed a couple around that time. So that's when you hunt the swamp. So you decide to go in with my 70 rule and kind of confirm it. So sure enough, you've got some, 5'1", 5'15" fawns. That's kind of lining up for you. And then you start looking around, you see that they're bigger, and then you hang a couple trail cameras in there. And how you dial this in further is with historical data. The 70 rule, the expectation is that it's only going to get you within a couple of weeks. It's a hell of a lot better than what you had, but it's only
Right.
going to get you within a couple of weeks. And so you really need to dial it in further. And we can get into historical data and how to do that. But once you collect more data, I can dial it into usually 2 or 3 days. And so, gathering the extra information is how you dial that from, say, 2 weeks to 2 days. But the 70 rule is an easy one to follow. It's easy to remember, and it will get you inside a 2 week window. And if you don't mind doing 6, 7, 8, 9 sits for a deer, that's going to put you on the money. I mean, that's too many sits for me, and I'm not being facetious. I get a lot of tags, and I can't do 10 sits to fill one, but like, that will put you on the money. If you use only the 70 rule and hunt like a hammer, you will be on the money.
Nice. I'm curious. I'm imagining like different areas. Obviously, different size of deer tracks, right? Like deer in the
Mhm.
south, a little smaller, right? So that 2-inch track you're talking about is also the width from side to side, correct? Like not length.
Yeah, it's usually width,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
various things can affect length. Like urban deer that are crossing the blacktop a lot and stuff, I find like their tracks are shorter. Sometimes they get worn
Right.
off, and I've heard like mountain bucks can get short tracks. And generally, I'm going based on
Right.
width. And I'll be honest with you, if you just start carrying one of these in your shirt pocket, like to whoever's listening, like you'll have some byproducts of that. For example, on my pieces, I can almost always measure a buck track and get a really good idea for how old he is. I mean, when I see a buck track that's 2 7/8 inches wide, it's probably a 3-year-old. And while he's a buck I need to start gathering some intel on, he's probably not for me. And so once you start to get a baseline just for your deer, Wisconsin, wherever you are, maybe you're in Maine and your does have a 4-inch wide track, but get a baseline for where you're at. And then obviously,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. The important piece there is get a baseline, look at find a doe track,
yeah.
multiple doe tracks, like different times, measure them, get a sense
Mhm.
for like, all right, give or take, they're roughly this wide in this area for me, and then when you start to
Yeah.
see fawn tracks, you can now get a good gauge as to how old that fawn is and when it was born, essentially based on that, dude.
Yes.
When I saw you,
And
when I
now
heard
when
you
you
kind of
hang your
talk about it,
cameras, that's going to line up with your big buck pictures. Why do
right?
that? Why
So
do that? Because
so
that's going to
let's
be
so
when you
let's
get your
move
big
into
buck
that.
pictures.
Yeah. So it's funny because like I didn't know you prior to me kind of finding this with that one spot that I had. Right. And then when you and I talked, it made so much sense. I was like, oh my God. I was like, yeah, I
Yeah.
need to start kind of paying more attention to this and hanging cameras based on this approach. But so and I want to move into the trail camera kind of component of things now.
Sure.
So, you're hanging trail cameras specifically to pick up fawn activity and fawning data, et cetera, right?
Yep.
So one, is this, I'm assuming some of this is to validate the tracks that you're finding, one, and then two, let's say you haven't found a track, or are you only hanging them in places that you found tracks? And maybe it's a good place to start.
So where I'm hanging fawning cameras is anything I talk about is 100% based off daytime deer. Period. So I am in a primary bedding area, and if someone missed the first part of the podcast, a lot of people consider different things primary bedding. What I consider primary bedding is that I get daytime deer pictures 7 days a week, year round. I mean, in the South here, we have a lot of open pines and a lot of shit land. And in the areas where I'm getting daytime deer 7 days a week, that's where I'm focusing. And so, basically, when I get into an area where I have what I consider to be primary bedding, what I'm looking for is quite a bit different from what I'm trying to hunt. So the cameras that I have in the fall that are on scrapes and on travel corridors, and maybe I'm trying to catch the picture of that nighttime buck when he crosses the highway or something, on a corridor or on a scrape, or maybe in some bedding areas during the day. That's not where I'm going to get fawning pictures. So, early season. Now you'll get them there later. Those does will bring those fawns to those scrapes at some point, and you'll be able to age them. Especially if your scrape is in the right area where you're servicing multiple doe groups. And we're not going to really get into scrape priority too much in mock scrapes, probably, but all scrapes are not created equal. And so you want your
Mm-hmm.
scrape in an area where you've got fawns that are two different sizes. That's going to be the lowest hanging fruit. If you've got nugget fawns and monster fawns, you're in the money. That scrape is, I mean, if you got security cover on all four sides and some other rules for scrapes, right? But you are in an area that services two doe groups, then that's money. And so, where I'm running cameras is not those spots. So I'm going to be in a primary bedding area. That's number one. It's got to be a daytime spot. Two is it's going to have a lot of broadleaf food below the belt buckle, really below the knee. Like it has to be broadleaf food, greenbrier, that type of thing, catbrier.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be really below the belt buckle, but really below the knee, man. Like if you want really good fawning success, your broadleaf food will be below the knee, because they start browsing at like 7 days old to 10 days old, I find. And what she'll do when they get to a certain age is she'll start to take them to a neutral location to nurse them so that they can defecate there, because she doesn't want them like pooping where she's hiding them. And then they'll do some browsing, and that she really will favor an area with super low, like poison ivy, winter creeper, greenbrier, something really, really low for that fawn to eat. They won't eat grass too much. But with that being said, so daytime broadleaf food, what's the other ingredient? It has to have super high stem count for security. And so grass for hiding, but they don't eat the grass. So you really got to have the thermal cover that a daytime.
All right, folks. Sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty. The interwebs didn't want to work, so we'll pick it up where we were at. So we were talking broadleaf, below the knee. Poison ivy, which I'm a huge fan of. Obviously,
We
I'm super
were
allergic to it. So super excited. Super
we
excited to
were
hear that.
we were planting a virus in people's minds. Yeah, and
That's
we
right.
talked all that shit at the beginning about the how this was going to be like super quality and everything. Um, uh, Yeah,
Nice.
so primary bedding area, obviously number one. That's going to mean 7 day a week deer. That's going to come with some qualities like thermal cover, and so they're going to want to be in that area, and then they're going to need that food that's really low, and it's got to be in and around something really super high stem count. So when you get those three, maybe it's
Right.
along a creek where some flooding created some diversity. Maybe it's hinge cuts on private land. Maybe you're in public land where you're at, and you find where an overgrown field and pines and a greenbrier patch all hit each other. She's going to stash her fawns in that grass, and he's going to hit those greenbriers. And so I have a lot of fawning cameras on low greenbriers. And you know how I was saying earlier about finding those rem beds by looking for the where that buck is staggering around and nipping up high? It's the same thing with those fawns. I mean, you can find where he's nipping down low. and you might need to adjust your cameras based on he's hitting the other side of the greenbrier patch like a sneaky little devil, and you'll get him. But you don't need the
Right.
information at that point, really, because if you're in there, you're going to see his track and you're going to know what the date is. Oh, wow, okay, it's 6:15 and he has a 1 inch wide track. So that's a November something fawn. I mean, if you use my 70 rule at that point, you're already there, boots on the ground. And so just apply it in real time, and keep the camera for
Right.
another spot, you know? But if
Right.
you're just
Yeah.
hanging
There's
cameras
one spot.
blind, that's what you want to focus on.
Yeah. There's one spot
Those
in
three
particular I'm
things.
thinking of. Yeah. There's a spot I'm thinking of that I have a camera in right now that I didn't put it there because I thought it was a fawning spot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've actually had good bucks on camera in this area, but in hindsight, it has everything that you're kind of talking about. And I have had fawns in there. I just haven't paid a whole lot of attention in the past to the fawn data that I had.
It's all going to
Um,
be
and
respectful with respect to each other with where she's going to hide them. I mean, you got to figure out what she's eating too. I mean, if you find the perfect spot, oh man, there's ankle high greenbrier everywhere, and they all look. It's right in the grass, and there's pines. It's perfect. I know this is a daytime spot, but if it's May and there's nothing for her to eat, she's not going to hide her fawn a mile from food. I mean, she has
right.
to come and check on the damn thing. And so you kind of got to stay in tune with your deer. I grow a lot of micro plots on the door knock pieces that I have and out back and stuff. I'm a big fan of a really tiny, small food plot just because here in the South, you can't get mature bucks to step out into the open for a lot of different reasons. Even at night, like I was saying, spotlighting. I mean, with between the dogs and the South Carolina, they get 5 rifle tags and it opens in August. I mean, the deer do not come out, and so I'm a big fan of small plots. But if I can make sure that that doe has something to eat in that area, or maybe it's on public where I know that it's a monster. Like a couple of my favorite fawning places are just these monster greenbrier patches where creeks have flooded during hurricanes, leveled it like Hurricane Katrina, and then it just greenbriered in. There's a spot where I have like 6 cameras, and I get like, and that's the thing that people need to realize. And let me just stop right there. So people are thinking like, well, where you live, that's the thing. I have a spot where I hang 6 cameras on one greenbrier patch. And it's on public. It's at the Uhari, which is 60,000 acres. This greenbrier patch is maybe 70 acres. It's huge in the bow of a creek where it's leveled it, and it's impenetrable when I have 6 cameras on the perimeter. And I get 3 different fawning dates. I get a really, really early fawn there, like April. And then we get some June fawns there. And then we get one like last year we had a pair of fawns that were they surfaced like maybe July 30th. And so yeah,
That's crazy.
it's different, and what we have there is 3 doe groups using those greenbriers essentially, or 3 or 4. And so it
Wow.
does change. Bucks can't teleport, so
Right.
the does are not all coming hot at the same time. Even in Maine, they're not. I mean,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know there's gonna be a rhyme or a reason to it.
Yeah. You're making me think because this spot that I was just talking about that I hung this camera on, and in hindsight, I think I probably dumb lucked, put myself in an area where there's probably like, good fawning information to be had. Um, I
Yeah.
had contemplated hanging another camera in a different section of it, and I didn't. And now, in hindsight, I'm like, I think I need to go back because this area is big enough, and like what it has kind of going on would lend itself to uh, kind of exactly what you're talking about, which is
Hmm.
like there's going to likely be multiple doe family groups that are using this particular area,
Hmm.
and I need to kind of be on top of it because they may not have the same.
And the other thing is, the one doe that you picked up with that estrus date that kind of yielded a big buck to you, she could be on the fringes of that doe group. And so you could drill in one direction or the other and actually find a horde of deer having fawns at that time.
Right.
And while I
Yeah.
would say you don't want to hunt in the bowels of that, um, because back to the scrape thing, um, my scrapes, which are in daytime spots, really almost I have 49 mock scrapes that I run, and
Hmm.
all of them service at least two doe groups. And I know
Hmm.
that because I have fawns of different sizes using them. And so that's how you build scrape priority, amongst other things, which we've got into in the last podcast. With I don't use any scent at all, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. Because I was going to ask you, you're talking about finding your fawns. And so let's
Hmm.
say that you do find you go out during turkey season, it's May 15th, and you're like, dude, I found a fawn track. Like,
Hmm.
holy shit. Because I found one in March this year, and that's a holy shit moment for me. So
Right.
let's say you find one in May, that's a holy shit moment for you, right? Like, that could
Right.
be like a 10-1 spot. And so, uh, you definitely don't want to plan your season on that. You've got to go into the bowels to make sure. You've got to find other ones,
Right.
because you just never know. You just never know. You need to have multiple information. But what I was going to say is, so you find that fawn track. My 70 rule, back to Dad's swamp, the earlier story where he tells you the swamp's always good around 10:31. You went in, you hung some cameras. Well, guess what you found? You found that actually the majority of your big buck pictures, while you did get a couple of them on 10:28, 10:29, 10:30, Dad was right. Actually, you got the majority of your big buck pictures like 10:18 and 10:19. And there was like a 2-day window where it was smoking hot. And
Hmm.
Dad was always hunting a week late and killing a lingering buck. He always thought it was a 10:31 swamp, but you did a little extra work. You went in with some trail cameras and you did that across multiple years. And you now know, actually, I need to take like 10:17 off from work, not
Yeah.
10:31. And so Dad was right, but you've dialed it in further. And so, using body language, using trail cameras, body language on deer, tail cupping is a huge one
Hmm.
that I look for. Um, tail cupping, rub urinating. Is it in the scrape? Is it around the scrape? If she's doing it around the scrape, is she nervous? Is she leaving the area for a few days? There's a lot of things to look for with body language for anybody who wants to dig into that avenue. But that can tell you a lot when you're trying to dial it in further. You really need to look for these keys. If you see a mature buck tail cupping, and it's around that time frame that we're talking about, you might have just dialed that in from a 2-week window to a 5-day window. And
And
then
that's
now
huge.
and that is huge. You just got a 2-week window, which is huge. Now
Hmm.
you've dialed it in even further. And so generally now we're to a point where you're talking about a 5-day hunt. And so you've used some trail cameras and you've dialed it in to about a 5-day hunt. How do you get those one sit kills? I pride myself on efficiency, man. Like, I kill a lot of deer in a short period of time. I think I killed 32 deer in 54 sits. My last 7 bucks were in 11 sits. My last 3 bucks were in 3 sits. So I kill a lot of bucks, like deer in short sits, and that's using this. And how I do that is because I dial it in across multiple years. And so all right, so I use my 70 rule. I get close. Now I'm only focusing on day walking bucks. We're on the second year of a buck. Took a couple seasons to piece the pieces together. This guy came back again a second time. Oh shit, I knew him from last year. That's Frank. He's back. Now he's 4. Look at him. He's beautiful. You still really don't have the information to kill him. I'm really, really looking for that third year hunt on a buck I know that has done a repeatable behavior for 3 seasons. He's come at 10:17 2 seasons in a row. The third season, I'm there. I'm waiting for him. And if he's alive, they come. I mean, that's what they do. And so that opens the door to the talk about historical data. A lot of guys throw that word around loosely, and like, what is
Hmm.
historical data? But and I love the scrape guys out there. I mean, I love them, and I love watching them. But you cannot lure a deer in with scent and call it historical data. You can't bait
Right.
them in. You can't lure them in with buck fever. You can't take pictures of night bucks and call that historical data. It has to be natural daytime deer movement that has not been manipulated and has been repeatable. And when you put all of this together and that, you have a very high odds sit. I've got, for
Right.
the first time in my life, I'm 46. This year I have I had 6 6-year-olds for the first time in my life,
Wow.
all day walking, all dates dialed in. I'm afraid I'm going to lose one because I found this is a whole separate wormhole, but I found his mother um, dead on the side of the highway this year, which makes me feel like he's probably not as high odds as Basid as he was.
Hmm.
And that has to do with social structure. And I think I'll just say this little nugget on that topic is I think a lot of times people are worried if their buck survived last season, and they shouldn't be. They should be worried how much of his social structure survived last season.
Hmm.
Because if that's not intact, he's not going to come back and be repeatable like he would have been. And so you need to be cognizant about the does you're killing, and you need to be cognizant about trying to collect this data in areas where does are getting pounded, because it's going to create a randomness and a
Hmm.
nomadity to the buck that makes it really hard to track. And so,
Do you find that he leaves like completely would leave the area, or does he just become less consistent when his
well,
social
they
structure gets?
they it starts out as less consistent. So what I'm afraid of this year is I'll have that buck a few times. He won't be as consistent as I hoped. I think he will come back a few times. I think because he has other deer in that social structure that he relates to. He runs with a couple other younger bucks that are her fawns too. They all run together in the summertime, and so I think that I think that he'll still hang around this summer, but I think that if I don't kill him this fall with his like even more part-time appearances than normal, then he's out. I think another
Hmm.
season or two, that buck is just going to be somewhere else. And again, that's all in the picture of like, well, he could already be somewhere else because we could have a horde of dogs come through. We could have a catastrophic Hurricane Katrina, 20
Right.
inches of rain. And so I'm always dealing with relocating these deer anyway in other areas. But I still focus on these deer do the same thing in the same areas. And so when shit hits the fan over here in this primary bedding area, daytime 365 area, they move to another area that can support deer in the same way. They don't just move over to like these beaches where there's no food. They'll navigate to other primary bedding areas. And so usually I can pick up those deer on another
Hmm.
island. I can pick them up somewhere else on higher ground where I know there's some thick honeysuckle when the deer are in there real heavy. Maybe I'll
Hmm.
all of a sudden a spot that's notorious for dinks. I'll get one of my slobs show up because I'm like, holy shit, he's a mile from where he's supposed to be, but we had all that
Right.
rain. And that's kind of how it is. It's no different than if you pressure a deer, how he just will move to like the
Hmm.
next, primary area. And in the mountains, that could be a mile, right? Like, I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
you're talking like in the south here where it's jungle, it's probably just across the highway. You can just
Right.
pick them up over the,
Thicker vegetations. There's just better opportunity for concealment, or
yeah,
the
or like if
next
you
the next
shoot
best
him,
bedding
yeah,
is not that far
yeah. A lot
away.
of times here, like if you shoot him and graze him, either he'll come right back or you'll just get him on the other side of the highway. Where like when I was in the Adirondacks, sometimes like if you exploded a buck out of his REM bed, um, you know, you might pick him up in another daytime spot, but that's like a mile and a half up the road. And
Right.
like that makes it frustrating. And so while I don't think the 70 rule is as applicable in the northernmost states, I will say that the need to focus on daytime deer increases in those areas.
Hmm.
You really need to get those bucks between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. Or
Yeah.
you're just not in the money.
Right.
You're just not close enough. And even if they're cruising during the rut, like that's a tough deal, man. I know a lot of these guys are rut hunters. And they kill monsters. Like I don't think I'll ever kill a 200, but I just don't want to do 15 sits, even if
Hmm.
it is a 200.
Yeah.
It's too much. I 2 3 sits I haven't encountered. The other thing I would say though is it's really important, and if you do this technique that we're talking about with the 70 rule and collecting data and invest in some SD cameras, you don't need cell cameras because you're hunting years out. I was telling you about the
Hmm.
27, 28
Yeah.
cameras. I'm in there collecting some fawning intel. I'm on some low growing greenbriers. I got some historical data from this past season. I've got historical acorn droppings. I've got historical breeding. Because the primary bedding area or two primary bedding areas will generally, if they're close, will generally, meaning two different doe groups are using them. If they're close, you will have a historical breeding area that services both of them. Like you'll see the
Hmm.
rubs.
Hmm.
And so when you get into these primary bedding areas, I'm looking for where the historical breeding activity is happening in those areas. When you can dial more in on daytime deer. I think the problem in the mountains is bucks will make a rub anywhere at night. And so
Hmm.
it's really hard to determine buck sign, like good buck sign from bad buck sign, because in that
Yeah.
situation, like if I came to PA and I hunted with you and we were walking in the woods, you're like, all right, bro, you go down that ridge, I'll go down this ridge. I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, I'm ignoring buck rubs.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, I don't care about them. I know Greg
Yeah.
would shoot me in the face for saying that.
Greg would shoot you in the face, but
But
you're
fuck
not
a buck
wrong
rub,
because
dude.
like,
They don't.
but
Yeah.
you're not wrong because you either have to have a really good understanding of like how and when deer are using the areas that you're hunting really, really
Mhm.
well, right? Like from either observation where you've either sat those areas and you've watched when deer were coming through, or you have a ton of trail camera data that you kind of know that like, okay, they're in this spot often during daylight, right? And during this time of year or whatever the case is, right? For like this year, the only piece of intel I had when I was chasing that deer in season was that I couldn't cut his track for the life of me, and he finally made a rub on camera in daylight, and then I was able to kind of like and I've talked about this in the past. I won't belabor it, but he had a very unique identifying antler feature. And so as soon as he made that rub, I saw it on camera and I could go to that tree and look at it. He made an identifiable mark where I was like, I can tell that this is his.
Yeah,
Like
that's how the
every time,
Magnolia
right?
Buck got his name. He liked
Yeah,
magnolia trees. I mean, he would
yeah.
shred them when he saw
And so
one.
now so it wasn't like I knew necessarily that he was making those rubs in daylight, but like based on finding them, what I could find was like what his general kind of like, I don't want to say his route, but like he's making all this sign like in this general area,
In
right?
his core area, the
Right. And
1,000 acres that he lives on.
right. And then I can go, okay, based on what I know about him when I had the encounter with him, based on whenever I had daylight trail camera photos of him, and based on where he made this rub, right? Where is he possibly going to be or spending his daylight hours most frequently? Right.
Right.
And so that
Yeah.
just comes down to like,
Yeah, so if me
woods.
and you were out scouting and I see that rub, okay, I lie. I'm not going to ignore it, but it just depends on where it is. I mean, if it's
Oh,
an open
100%.
hard, yeah, if
Yeah.
it's an open hardwoods, I'm going to ignore it. I mean,
Yeah.
to some extent, but if it's a buck rub that's, let's say, 5 feet to the top and 2 foot to the bottom, and I know it's a mature deer from how low it goes, and all this,
Yep.
woodsmanship things, if I can deduce that it's a mature, maybe I saw a 3 inch track, so if I can deduce
Hmm.
that it's a mature animal, but let's say I think it's a nighttime spot, I mean, I'm gonna branch out from there. I mean, but I'm
Yeah.
still
Cause at that
looking
point
for,
you look at it directionally and go like,
yeah,
okay,
but I'm
if
still
I'm going
looking
to
for
assume
that
this is,
daytime spot. I mean,
yes.
number one is, can I kick a basketball and find it? Like,
Right.
because
Yeah.
if I could throw my work boot and find that bitch, I am not in the kill zone. Period. Like,
Right.
that is not
Throw
where
my
he's
work
gonna.
boot.
He is
That's
not gonna
great.
show up there.
That's great.
Like,
That's how I'm going to test all
yeah.
my setups from now on. How far can I throw
So
my work boot?
right, and so for me, I want the stem count. I want where like I feel like if you threw my hard hat, I'd never see it again.
Right.
On top of that, I want you know, on top of the stem count, I mean, I want to see the browse damage. It's huge,
Hmm.
man. I hate to keep saying browse damage, but it's huge because these deer, especially the deer in ag country, are going to ag at night. They're going to ag
Hmm.
at night. They're not browsing stuff at night. And so,
Hmm.
maybe you can use browse damage to find a travel corridor, like we talked earlier. Where's
Hmm.
that prick crossing the creek, whatever. But browse damage. So for me, I'm gonna find that buck rub on public. In big woods, I'm going to immediately open probably Spartan Forge and where's the thick
Hmm.
shit at? And I'm going to head
Yep.
towards the thick shit. And then once I get in the thick shit, that's where I'm going to start looking around for browse damage. And I'm going to try to
Hmm.
deduce if I'm in a daytime area or not. Because the question is, if we're out scouting public, I got 2 cameras in my bag and you got 2 cameras in your bag. Where are you going to hang your two? I'm not
Right.
hanging one of mine on that buck rub. I'm going to go in that thick shit where maybe
Hmm.
2 trails come together naturally, and I'll hang a vine so they hit their head on it, and I'll piss on the ground, and I'll hang a camera real high. I
Yep.
always walk with a stick so I can get them up. And I'll hang the camera in that thick stuff, and I'll just say, all right, man, I got one camera I feel okay about.
Yep.
But
You
I'm
and I are
not
a lot
gonna
the same
hang
in that
it.
way.
Yeah, yeah.
We're a lot the same in that way, where it's like
It's got to
I'll
have a
throw.
lot of droppings. It's got to
Yeah,
look like bedding.
yeah. It's like, and I love what you're talking about there, because like I'll walk a lot of times with camera or two in my pack, like in season or out of season, whatever. And I'll call them sometimes if I'm in a new area, because like the scenario you painted there is like we're kind of in a newish area, right? Maybe I know a little bit about the area, but we'll pretend we both don't. Like a lot of times I'm throwing stuff out on, especially if we're like post season scouting it to a degree. I'm a lot of times just throwing a camera on something that I get like where I'm like, this feels right. I'm seeing a lot of the stuff that I like. I may not see any rubs or anything like that, but I just get a spidey sense, and I'm like putting a camera out for validation, right? It's like, I want to
Yeah.
know what's happening here. Is it a daylight spot? Is it, heavily traveled? What are they doing when they're here? Like, I'm just trying to learn about that spot, right? And I feel like too many times when people use cameras, they use them to get the pretty pictures. And like, I've been on this like kick more so lately, because I feel like a lot of times people talk bad about trail cameras and like how people use them. But I'm like, truthfully, it's like you should be using them to better your woodsmanship. Like the trail camera should ultimately give you information to ask better questions.
Yes.
Right. Of what is around you. Right.
Yes.
That's really what they're there for. They're not really ever going to give you the answer necessarily, unless like you have a presumption of like, I feel like this is an early fawn spot because I found a track. The 70 rule plays out here, and I'm going to hang a camera there. Now all of a sudden I saw an early fawn on camera. So boom. Okay. It validated it.
That's a good point. So then what's going to happen? You're going to go back in October and hunt, and guess what? You saw him. You saw him. You didn't get a crack at him, but you saw him. You got a glimpse of him. He was on camera, and he's gone. You missed him. Next year, you go back in there, maybe you get busy at work and you don't get to hunt. But guess what? He shows up at the same time in the same thicket and while I do only find about 50% of bucks repeat, it's only like half.
Yeah.
But about every other buck will repeat that behavior. And so when you find that, that is the most rare of all gems, because now you know on year 3 that that's a dead deer unless you jack it up.
Yeah. And it's
You're
usually,
gonna get excited, and you're gonna go in there and check a camera when it's not. I say all
when
the
it's not
time, take
time.
advantage of the rain. I'm a big because I'm only hunting in primary bedding areas, which I know is taboo. This whole thing is taboo to a lot of Western guys. I was gonna say I have a saying, take advantage of the rain, because I will not go into my bedding areas unless it's absolutely pouring like a monsoon. I just won't do it. It's not worth it to me, because they'll adjust their behaviors. But I was going to say, this is taboo to a lot of Western guys. When I start talking about like how I only hunt the sanctuaries, because they call them sanctuaries, and it's like, oh yeah, we don't go in there, or, we respect the deer's bedding areas and stuff like that. And I guess in an area where you have a real hard rut and maybe you got a lot of big bucks, you could probably get away with that. But I just don't think that those guys do a lot of sits to kill deer.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is, this whole conversation is taboo to a lot of people. So I'm really grateful that you had me on to talk about it. And what I will say is, I'm grateful for you having me on to talk about it, and I'm also grateful for like all of the deer labs and deer associations that have popped up in the past few years, because, while I think that this conversation is taboo, and I think that there's a few people out there that are real killers and this is going to plant a virus in their brain, I think that to the majority of the population, this conversation isn't really relevant. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the deer labs and the deer associations, because in the past couple of years, they've really stepped up and started sharing a lot of the information I've been talking about for a long time. And I get less crazy looks than I used to, I guess. I mean, I'm telling you, dude, 10 years ago when I'd talk about fawning, I would get looks like I was one of these red moon weirdos.
It made so much sense to me. Like, so when you and I talked, but I also like, I've had on.
Oh, you're a red moon guy?
Right.
Oh, dude,
I've had on
Dr.
I've had on Bronson Strickland and stuff like that, and talked to him about, just a bunch of different stuff, from buck bedding to whatever the case was.
I got to dig deep on his stuff. Everybody keeps talking about Bronson, right? Is his first
Bronson
name?
Strickland. Yeah.
I got to dig into their stuff.
Super smart guy, MSU Deer Lab. He's one of my favorite people to have on. And just to talk deer biology, what they do, because he's a very data-based guy. And what I really appreciate about chatting with him is that I'll just give you an example. Again, that early fawn spot that you and I've talked about that I found, and I kind of painted the picture for him. And, when I told him what I had kind of understood, like, hey, I had a hypothesis. I thought this was the case, ran some trail cameras. I kept seeing the same thing year over year. And then boom, all of a sudden I see an early fawn drop in a back date, the 200 days. And she had to have been bred by 1020. Right. Well, I was like, which then makes sense to why it's like I would all of a sudden start to see the buck parade around like the 14th, 15th. You know what I mean? You'd start to see him trickle in, and he loved that because that was a very scientific approach to deer hunting, right? Where like it's all the stuff that you're talking about.
I would love to talk to someone like that because a lot of times, because I'm an engineer and this is not what I'm educated in, a lot of times I do wonder like how much of what I'm seeing and like what my deductions are, like how much of I think that some of them maybe I'm off. And I think that some of my assumptions and deductions, I'm real close. You know what I mean? Right. Well, and I'm there, and it's like I do feel like there's people like that could help me sew it tighter.
Right, and I would say it certainly sew it tighter. I think is a great way to put it.
Because I know I'm not right. I'm just close.
Right, and I think even whenever I don't want to speak for Dr. Strickland, but even whenever I talk with him and guys like him that are gathering the data and have grad assistants helping them gather and parse the data and stuff like that. Even when they talk about the data that they find, they still don't talk about it in absolutes, right? Because the thing that they always kind of make sure that we always keep at the front of our mind is these are still wild animals reacting to their environment, right? And so nothing is full bulletproof, but you can see some trends like you're talking about over time that hold true in a lot of scenarios.
All I can guarantee you is a high odds sit.
Right, and
but a lot goes into that. You have to be willing to gather the data.
Yeah, and Dr. Strickland's a hunter too at heart, right? And so he knows that struggle of like things that he wants to believe as a hunter that we've been taught to believe.
Yes,
that he's debunked with data, but there's but it still can happen. You know what I mean? So he's still a hunter, and that's what I kind of appreciate about him. Just in general, because there was the thing that blew my mind was when I had him on, not blew my mind, but I had him on and we talked about some bedding stuff that they had done, and it was around the rut. And the crazy thing was that the buck bedding that they had tracked was everyone's thinks, hey, bucks bed most consistently early season, right? Especially if we're talking about Midwest, because they do all their studies in Mississippi.
They bed consistently before the black and tans are on them.
Right. And so when they look at it, it's like, conventional wisdom is bucks are more predictable in that early time frame where it's bed to food, et cetera, et cetera. And as you get closer to the rut, they become more or less and less predictable, right? But what their data actually showed was that the bucks that actually were bedding more consistently during the rut time frame than they ever did any other time of year. And so my question to him was...
Well, define rut time frame.
Right.
Because I'm considering that here, September 20th on. And
right. So
and if that's what you're considering, I would 100% agree. That's when my bucks, I can count on them.
Right. And so I forget what the dates are, but yeah, it'd be like what you would be like your core primary kind of like big rut dates. So for like the Midwest, it would be that last week of... October-ish into like the first week or two of November.
So if that's when their bedding is the most predictable.
It wasn't in Mississippi because their rut dates are different, right? So I think it was like December time frame, but
it's later. Yeah.
So, but regardless, my question to him was, did you have any trail camera data that could, validate or debunk or poke holes in the notion that those bedding areas that were super consistent during that time frame for those bucks was in proximity to doe bedding? He said we didn't have cameras to validate that. And I said,
there's your missing ingredient.
Right. And so I asked him, though, and this is where his hunter hat comes on. This is why I like talking to him, because I was like, well, if you had to bet an amount of money that mattered to you, would you bet on the being doe bedding? He said,
all of my money. All of my money. I know that across 12,000 videos, 10,000 videos.
All of my money and your money too.
Yes, all of it.
That's why I like talking to him. Because he
Absolutely,
even
yes.
though he'll make the leap of like, this is what I know from the data, and then if I put my deer hunting hat
Yes.
on, right, this is what I
So
think.
for me to so let's say that I was going to try to debunk what he said. There's no way
Hmm.
because here's my data. One, I have no buck. Period.
Hmm.
He shows up when he shows up. I don't have that data through the summer. I don't track
Hmm.
summer bucks. So let's say he shows up 9:20. I have extremely consistent bedding from him in that thicket, and then if he goes to it with some bucks, I track across multiple bedding areas, and then he'll have extremely consistent bedding there for that time frame. That's the time frame I'm trying to hunt, that breeding time frame using the
Hmm.
70 rule. During the window that we're talking about, that 14 days where you can narrow it in with
Hmm.
the rule and then dial it in even further with historical data, the betting during that time is extremely consistent, and that's why it's a high odds sit.
Hmm.
The betting on that deer is not the same in August or January. So I
Hmm.
completely agree with that statement. I mean, that is exactly what I see. I mean, that is what I hunt. I mean, that is when they come. That is when they're there. That is why they're there. You can go out
Hmm.
and figure out, like, when they're coming by based on your fawning information.
Yep.
You've got to do other legwork, like on the particular piece of property. I mean, this is all like, okay, the deer is on my piece. I know he's here now. Like, I'm in this 5,000 acres of public, but I'm in this, I don't care. When you tell me you're hunting 5,000 acres of public, like, don't tell me that, dude. Like, just tell me what you're hunting. Like, if it's an 80-acre pine thicket, just say it's an 80-acre pine thicket. Like, I don't care about the
Hmm.
5,000 acres that you're hunting, right? Like,
Right.
that's stupid. Like, the whole road is woods. Like, what are you going to count the
Right.
million acres that touches that? Like, tell me what you're hunting, dude. You're hunting an 80-acre pine thicket. Okay. Well, when does
Right.
he come there? Oh, well, he comes here around, this date and whatever every year. Okay, so that's what you're trying to do. And the betting at that time, at that location, is super consistent if you can nail it down.
Hmm.
And a lot of times I think guys, maybe you first told me because I listened to all your podcasts. You were the first podcaster I ever listened to when I came
Well.
out from under a rock, and I listened to them all in order. But I have to catch up. And you told me, maybe it was you and Greg talking about the spot within a spot.
Mm-hmm.
And that really resonated with me because it's all about the spot within a spot. It's
Hmm.
all about the spot within a spot. I don't care about the 60,000 acres that's the Uwahari National Forest. I've got 80 there, I've got 40 there, I've got 110 over there. Those are my hunting spots. Those are my primary bedding areas. Those are my thickets. There's a lot that comes with hunting the way that I talk about hunting. I have to
Hmm.
do all day sits in September and October. I cannot get down out of my tree at noon and walk out in a primary bedding area. So it's taboo when you tell guys you're doing
Hmm.
all day sits in September. They scoff. You can't hunt October mornings, the whole 9 yards. But
I
it's all
love me an October
silly.
morning. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to, if you're focusing on primary bedding area and daytime deer, you're going to be held hostage. So just plan
Hmm.
on it.
Right.
You're not going to be able to get down. So
Yeah.
um,
Nice.
that's
So
pretty much, yeah.
yeah. So I want to bring this thing full circle and get back
Yes.
to the Magnolia Buck now. So
Oh,
how
yeah.
so how did you sit for him based on everything that we've talked about?
Yep. So the Magnolia Buck. So went into this area, like I was talking about. This was probably 2021, and I was running like some 2023 to 2024 cameras. That was my goal. Like I said, I was doing earlier today. I was just going in there with the intention that we should all have. There's not going to be a big buck. You're going to grow a big buck. You're going to make a scrape. You're going to get some deer hitting it. It's going to be a daytime only spot. You're going to get some dinks. And one of them you're going to grow into a 4-year-old and you're going to shoot it, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
expectation. Sometimes we get lucky, but 90% of the deer I kill, I grow accidentally. It's like that's Frank, the 4-pointer, and now he's a freaking Pope and Young, It's like
Right.
that happens, you
Hmm.
when you run 40, 50 scrapes, you accidentally grow mature bucks out of spike horns. And so that's the expectation that, setting
Hmm.
goals is the lowest hanging fruit. They should be achievable. So my goal
Hmm.
at that spot was to go in, run a 2024 camera for a few years, and collect some data. And I did that. So I picked up I collected the first year. I just ran cameras as a like a trap line to try to get some, nighttime, daytime start stuff. And then
Hmm.
from there, I was able to year two. I got inside two primary bedding areas. One's on an island and one's across on the mainland. I got into those two areas. I focused all of my attention into those areas with two mock scrapes, daytime scrapes, no night pictures. I had old man Earl hitting the one on mainland. They were just security cover on all four sides, known daytime
Hmm.
spots, no lure, naturally hitting my scrapes. And I started to see some better bucks. And then the third year I was in there, which was 2022, I believe, or three, I saw the Magnolia Buck. I think it was him as a 2 year old. Went back in 2023. That was when he was a 3 year old, but he didn't have all the kickers and stickers. He was like a 125-inch 8 point with like a hook on his base.
Hmm.
And that was that year. I passed him because I was hunting a monster. But he showed up the same year as the time as the year before. I knew it was him, and so I said, "Oh, okay." He showed up around that. It was like 9:25. It was late
Hmm.
September. I was in the spot because I had I believe it was like a April. Um, I don't have my computer. I want to say it was like an April 16th fawn or something. I forget now. It's
Hmm.
been a while. But I had an early fawn, so I was focusing in, or a couple early fawns. I was focusing in there. Found him at 2, saw him at 3, hunting a monster. I passed him. Then I almost called it to a T. 2024. I went in there to kill the Magnolia Buck, and I called him that because he would only rub magnolia trees. Like we
Hmm.
have them here, and he would only rub those trees, and that's how he got his name. And so I went in there, and 20 last season, not this past season, but the one before, I went in there to hunt him, and he had showed up 3 years in a row, round 9/20/25, and he'd stay until about 10/10. And so that was my plan, to hunt that scrape during that time frame, and I went in there and I did that. And that was my first sit of 2023. And on my first sit, I killed that 150-inch 10 point. I didn't expect that deer. I never seen that deer before in my life. He was running with the Magnolia Buck. I saw the Magnolia Buck coming. I went to full draw. I was going to let the doe that was in front of him go through the scrape, and you figured I could hold my bow that long. And the first deer wasn't a doe. He popped out of the jungle, and it was that 10. So I shot him. And when I shot him, that was it. So I waited a couple days, went back in there, hunted one more time, didn't see the Magnolia Buck, and it was a wrap for that season. So this past season, I went in there, and I actually, he wasn't in that exact spot, but I picked him up on camera on the same island, just on the other end of the island. And he was using the other mainland on the other side. So I found him, but in all of the years, so pause right there. So in all the years I found this buck, I know that he used around 40 beds. I only found one of what I think is three of his daytime spots. That little 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre like bubble that they live in during the day.
Hmm.
I think I only found one because he would only be there 2 days a week, and if weather was real bad, maybe 3 days a week. And so he would be there during the day, just only a couple days a week. And so I know I found one of his bubbles, but I'm sure he had some other ones. It could have been 2 miles up the road. Who knows? But
Right.
I found one of his daytime spots. And so probably I had around 40 beds for him. In his little bubble, he had 6 or 7, but I was hunting. I could shoot his primary bed. And the one picture I sent you where he's standing, it's on my page, his front feet are in his hole and he's looking at the camera. And I shot him stepping into, like, he was just about to be in that bed when I shot him. But I sat there. So I was late this year, so I got screwed over by work. 9:25 came, and I didn't get any pictures of him. And then, dude, I almost screwed myself. And this is a podcast for itself. I almost screwed myself because take advantage of the rain. I'm at the mercy on a buck like that. I'm not going in dry. It's got to
Right.
be pouring for me to go in, and even then it's probably going to be like at night when he's gone to ag. I'm not going to go like at noon and bust him
Right.
out of there. So I was kind of at the mercy of that, and I got foolish. And I went in, and the one picture that I sent you, where he's standing in his bed looking at the camera, I hung a cell camera there like an asshole. And when he triggered it, he heard the modem or whatever go off. Like he could hear that bitch. You see his
Right.
ears. Like he can
Right.
hear it. Like he hears the camera. And it's high. And he's like, wee, like he's here. He's like, what the fuck is that? And so I hung a cell camera, and I almost dicked myself because he didn't come back. It was 9:25, and he didn't come back until like 10:06. I didn't see him at all on that cell camera. And then he triggered it on I think 10:07 or 10:08, but all I saw was his back. I didn't see his horns, and so I said, "Oh, because that's always tough. It's like you at least want to see some nuts hanging or something. You're like,
Right.
oh, is that him? I think it's him. He's kind of got that one tuft. You're like, you're looking at
Yeah.
every hair. Like, is that his? Is
Yep.
that his shoulder? And you're like, I think that's him. So I went on 10, and I hunted all day. 22 hours, and I hunted all day from 4:30 in the morning until dark, which was like 7:30 at night, on the 10th, on the 11th, and then finally at 8:30 in the morning on the 12th, he came to that bed and I killed him. And that was 22 hours and 3 days sitting
Hmm.
on that REM bed,
Yeah.
because
Nice.
I knew he was using it part-time.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
living somewhere and they're doing it usually part-time. I've never known a buck to just burn into a device, or to burn into a spot, um, getting a device storage alert. I guess I
Yeah.
don't think I was recording this, but
No, we're good.
but yeah, but I've never known a buck to burn into like one spot like that. So
Right.
um, you know,
Yeah.
my
It's
bad about the alerts there.
that's
Sorry
all right,
about that.
man. Dude, that was wild. Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
cool. It was
The
cool
old
to
Iron Will took him down.
yeah.
Gotta give my boy Marty a plug.
Nice. The it was cool to hear like the story previously, when you and I spoke, whatever it was, a year and a half ago or whenever the last podcast was that we did together. And then when I saw you send the picture through, I was like, I was stoked for you, man, because I knew that
Thank
was a
you.
deer you had been watching for a while.
I
Super
got
cool buck,
emotional actually, and I never do
dude.
that.
And you
I've
should,
killed,
man. When you
dude. I
put that
know.
much time in on a deer, you know what I mean. It's like, and you had to work that hard for it to understand. Like, it's interesting, when you get a chance to follow a deer for a few years, either knowingly or unknowingly, right? Like for me, following this deer that I chased this year, I didn't know that I was going to hunt him eventually because I was just trying to figure out when I knew enough about him to feel like I could go hunt him, right? And I didn't know if maybe that would never happen, right? Like that was a possibility. I just may have felt like I just don't know enough about this deer to go hunt him. That was a possibility. And just so happened this year was one of those years where, a couple of the puzzle pieces fell into place. And I was like, I think I know enough to where I can make a real good run at what I think he's going to do. And, getting to kind of, and then going back and and knowing that I'd known of him for several years and had all these pictures and stuff like that, you get to really kind of know them,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's,
oh yeah. I know all my deer, and it's funny that people say that, And I was telling you, I run over 100 cameras and have for a while now. Um, I've got probably 45 deer that I actually, don't laugh at me, but I probably have 45 deer that I really care about.
right. Yeah.
I know that sounds stupid, but they're my deer. And I
Right.
even have a couple that like want to walk up to my wife's Jeep right here in the yard, and that's all part
Right.
of that, right? And I got some on
Right.
public over there and there and there. And I got like 45 deer that I care about, but I'm tracking probably 300 daytime deer very intimately, very intimately. And so I have 18 cameras on one doe group where I had some piebalds,
Hmm.
um, very into, because, well, I'm not saying everybody needs to go buy 18 cameras. I mean, dude, an SD camera on Temu is $12. Like,
Right.
tell your wife you want a 10 pack for your birthday and like go get it done, man, because
Right.
it, you don't
Yeah.
need cell. In fact, I don't really like cell cameras. I mean, the more I use them, the more they dick me, and so I'm just sick of like bucks hearing them.
Right.
And nobody
Yeah.
talks about the sound of trail cameras, and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah. There's definitely some that make I've used some that have made noise in the past, right? Like you can
I can't hear it. But I guess
I can't
those
either,
bastards can though. Yeah.
right?
They look
Key
great, and you
is,
can tell if their ears are on your camera. Like
oh
both
yeah,
ears are on your
yeah. I've
camera.
even had that with
he
SD
hears it.
cameras too. Like I could hear them going off,
Mm.
But yeah, I mean that's always the tricky game you play, right? Is trying to get close enough to get the intel that you need, but not alert them that they're being watched or, whatever the case is. But
yeah.
Brother, I appreciate you coming on, dude. I've kept you for about an hour and a half, man. I want to be sensitive to your time. I need to eat some dinner. It sounded like the ladies got home from the dress alteration, so I need to get out and spend some time with them. But before I get out of here, and I'll let you leave, let people know where they can find out more about you and find any of the stuff that you've been putting out either this year or in the years past.
Sure, yeah. So, real quick, I mean, one of my favorite sayings is if you're hunting hot sign, you're a day behind. I learned that tracking deer, a day behind a buck can be a mile. That is not going to be a high odds sit. If you're hunting hot sign, you're a day behind. Use my 70 rule and get out in front of these deer. It'll really, really help you have more encounters at a very minimum. Thanks, Clint. Brandon Barlow _Brandon_Barlow on Instagram. I don't really have a YouTube that I care to have anybody view. It's a shitstorm. So Instagram is where you can find me, and I really, really am grateful, Clint. Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
We got to get on sometime. I always talk to Greg, and we got to get on sometime. Me and you just bash him for an hour.
Yeah, there you go. We'll make that a point, dude. I appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, buddy. See ya.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible: Tacticam, Osseo Gear, Hawk Optics, Tethered, Face Off E-Bikes, and Lathrop & Sons Boot Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.